Hello, welcome to Church Without Walls. Thanks very much to Gordon and Lorna for very kindly asking me to speak on this occasion. Today we're going to talk about something quite interesting, when time started. When time started. And we're also going to be talking about something which you may have heard of called wormholes. That's an Einstein-Rosen bridge. It's actually a connection between one part of space-time and another. They're not theoretical, they've actually happened, and I'm going to show you when they happened. We're going to start at the beginning, when God created the heavens and the earth. In the beginning, Genesis 1 verse 1, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. And then God said, let there be light, and this is what light looks like. It's photons moving in a waveform. And God said, let there be light, and then there was light. Now, in the next picture, I want to show you Einstein's law of relativity, which is E equals mc squared. Energy equals mass times the square of the speed of light. So there is a connection between mass, m, E, energy, and the speed of light, which is a measure of time. So if you come back to me, I'll try and explain all that to you. It's not actually too difficult. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now, God, of course, is spirit and must be worshipped in spirit and in truth. What he did was created something quite new for him, for them, I should say, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, Elohim, plural. He created the matter of the heavens and the earth. In other words, the planets, the sun, the moon, the stars, and the earth. And it says everything was formless and void. But then God said, let there be light, E equals mc squared. God created energy, photons moving in a waveform. Now, because E equals mc squared, energy equals mass times the square of the speed of light. That's when time started, right at the very beginning. Now, the next question is, when did God do this? Now, a lot of Christians are very confused about this, and it's very simple from the New Testament for us to know exactly when God created the universe. I'm not going to go through it in detail simply because of lack of time, but if you go to the end of Luke chapter 3, you'll see there are 77 generations from Adam all the way down to Jesus Christ. And 77 generations is roughly 4,000 years, give or take. It doesn't really make a huge amount of difference, but roughly 4,000 years. And of course, Jesus Christ was roughly 2,000 years ago. He lived on earth about 2,000 years ago. So from Adam to now is roughly 6,000 years. But in Mark 10:6, it says that Adam and Eve were created at the very beginning of creation. I'll say that again, Mark 10:6. Jesus himself said that Adam and Eve were created at the very beginning of the creation. Now, Adam and Eve were created 6,000 years ago, and Jesus has just said that Adam and Eve were created at the same time as everything else, actually on day 6. So when was the whole universe created? Well, the answer is 6,000 years ago. So unless Jesus and Luke are both liars, that is actually the truth of the situation, which gives rise to lots of problems for evolutionists. Now, I want to show you the next picture. Now, that is a star called Sirius. And it takes 4 years for the light from Sirius to reach Earth. And here, the next picture is the Eagle Nebula, which is a distant galaxy. And it takes 7,000 years for the light from that Eagle Nebula to reach Earth. In other words, 6,000 years ago, God created a mature universe. Adam and Eve were mature. They'd picked apples. There were bees buzzing around, I expect. And the light from the Eagle Nebula was already reaching planet Earth. In other words, God's totally in control of time. Right, now let's look at some controversial scripture. In Joshua 10, we read about how Joshua commanded the sun to stand still. And if you look at the internet, there are all sorts of ridiculous explanations how this possibly could have happened. I'll tell you how it did happen, is that God stopped time. There is no other explanation. In the next picture, God stopped time for a day and a night. That's sort of a picture of nighttime when Joshua is fighting the Amalekites and the Hittites and the Jebusites and all the rest of them. And it took nearly 24 hours. But God stopped time. He didn't put a brake on planet Earth and a brake on the sun. And I'll tell you why. If you look in the next picture now, the Earth on the right there is moving, has a circular movement at the equator of about 1,000 miles an hour, which is 1.5 times the speed of sound. The Earth itself is moving through space around the sun at 68,000 miles per hour. So imagine you were an open-top sports car traveling at either 1,000 miles an hour or 68,000 miles an hour, whichever you choose. Doesn't make any difference because you're doing both right now. And suddenly everything stopped. What would happen to you if you hadn't got your seatbelt on? Well, you'd be flying through the air at 1,000 miles an hour, which is 1.5 times the speed of sound. There will be a sonic boom as you flew through the air, and the same with Joshua. Next problem, in the next picture we see the planets. They all had to stop completely. The reason why is that each of those planets, if you look at the next picture, they've got a central core called magma, which is molten. And if you stop a planet such as Earth, traveling at 68,000 miles an hour, everything's going to crack. There'll be massive volcanoes and eruptions of magma all over the Earth, and there'll be this magma flying through the atmosphere at the speed of sound. Unbelievable. But just as bad as that, the 2/3 of the Earth is sea. And have a look at this picture. This is a mild illustration of what it would look like. A massive tsunami as all the ocean water suddenly erupts from the ocean seabeds and crashes all over the land of the Earth. And I don't know how high those two tsunamis would be, probably 10 miles high. So obviously that didn't happen. No, what did happen is God stopped time completely, because God is in control of everything. Now let's look at the next picture. And we're told that King Hezekiah actually wanted a sign from Isaiah. And for some reason, I can't think why, Hezekiah thought it would be easier for God to actually make the sun go backwards instead of forwards. Both I would have thought are equally as difficult. But anyway, Hezekiah, I think, was a bit of a stupid guy. And he wanted God to move the sun backwards. Now, for exactly the same reason, God actually physically moved time backwards 10 degrees. The Earth didn't suddenly stop rotating and move backwards, and the sun didn't suddenly move in the solar system. The planets didn't all move. No, God moved the whole of time backwards. Let's look now at something really interesting now in the New Testament, at the Transfiguration. You know, in the Transfiguration that Peter, James and John, that's Jesus' favorite disciples, were taken up a high mountain. They saw Jesus transfigured before them, and Jesus became brighter than the noonday sun. And he was there in his glorified body. And Moses and Elijah were beside him. So, in fact, he was in eternity. Now, in theoretical physics, if you're moving at the speed of light, you are in eternity. Now, Jesus was in eternity because Moses and Elijah were with him. So I'm suggesting to you that the atoms of Jesus' body were moving at the speed of light. And in fact, in the sun, nuclear fusion is happening all the time, which is a miracle in itself. But something even more profound was happening in Jesus' body, because the light that came from his face and his body was brighter than the sun. Now, what in effect was happening here is that Peter, James, and John were on this 7th day. It says after 6 days, so it was on the 7th day. They were actually looking into eternity. So they were actually looking through an Einstein-Rosen bridge, a link between this time and space-time. It's called a wormhole, but that's slang. The correct word is an Einstein-Rosen bridge. And there are quite a lot of these occasions in the New Testament. Let's have a look at another one. If we move to the next slide now, because I can't remember exactly what's on the next slide. There we have Peter walking out to Jesus, who's on the water. And if you read the text very carefully, when Jesus gets back into the boat, immediately the boat is on dry land. Now, how can that happen? Well, the answer is the boat and the disciples and Jesus moved through a wormhole, an Einstein-Rosen bridge in time, so they were immediately on the land. Let's look at the next picture. Now there in Acts chapter 8, we have Philip baptizing the Ethiopian. And it's as soon as the Ethiopian came out of the water, Philip disappeared. And he was found in Azotus, which is 40 miles away. How did that happen? Well, Philip went down a wormhole, an Einstein-Rosen bridge, a bridge in time between where he was in the desert and Azotus on the seashore, 40 miles away. Let's look at the next picture now. Now that is the synagogue where Jesus gave his very first sermon from Isaiah 61. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, and today this has been fulfilled in your presence. Well, how do you think that went down in his very first sermon? Basically, he was saying that I am God. He said, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me, and this has been fulfilled in your presence. And they were absolutely furious. So, I don't know how many there were in that synagogue, but they took him very close where Tim Vince has taken me, to Mount Precipice. And if you threw Jesus or anybody else off Mount Precipice, very near Nazareth, that would mean certain death. There is Jesus about to be thrown off this very steep cliff, but he's disappeared from their presence. They were like statues and he walked through them. How did that happen? How did that happen? Well, all I can tell you, I'm surmising here, but Tim Vince agrees with me that this was another example of an Einstein-Rosen bridge, is that Jesus actually walked through time so that the time stopped and all those people who were about to murder Jesus were stationary in time and Jesus simply walked through them. And let's look at the next slide now. We know that Jesus rose from the dead. And that's definitely what's going to happen to all of us. And all of us one day will go through a wormhole or an Einstein-Rosen bridge. In 1 Corinthians 15, Paul says, I tell you a mystery. We shall not all die. We shall all be changed in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye. For this mortal body must put on immortality. This mortal body must put on immortality. And I'd like to finish on a little parable which is available for all of us in nature. If you come back to me, you're probably familiar with caterpillars. And they go into a chrysalis and the whole of their bodies are dissolved. And then they emerge as butterflies. Let me tell you one thing, is that the DNA of butterflies and the DNA of caterpillars is identical, except that the genes, the butterfly genes in caterpillar is turned off, and the genes in the butterfly, the caterpillar genes are turned off. Now, I don't know, but God has the genetic code, the genome of all of our bodies, all of our individual bodies, different. In heaven, he's got our physical makeup, the genetic code of our bodies, and all he has to do is when this physical body dies, our spirit leaves our body and we go to heaven down a wormhole, an Einstein-Rosen bridge from this time to heaven time, eternity, and God will give us a new body. Just like the butterfly has a new body from the caterpillar, the word is we will be changed, metamorphosed in the Greek, into a new body. Thanks for listening, and God bless you.